let's look at how to use the SPDIF input on our Komplete Audio 6. And in our case, we're going to be hooking it up to an 11 rack. All right, now before we get started, I just want to mention that we are using an Avid 11 rack, and the way we're going to set this up is we're going to have our Komplete Audio 6 be our interface for, in our case, Pro Tools, and we're going to be using the 11 rack as an outboard processor. Now, again, we're using the Avid 11 rack, but everything you learn in this video is applicable to any other sort of outboard gear you want to use, any other sort of interface. Now, when we have the Komplete Audio 6 as our main interface, we're not going to see the inputs in Pro Tools for our Avid 11 rack or whatever interface you happen to be hooking up. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, Mac is a little bit different. We're going to be using Windows. On Mac, there is this thing called aggregate. Again, we're on Windows, so we're not using aggregate or anything like that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Just showing you how to hook this up, and I might go through a few special cases, situations that we can do with our particular interface, the 11 rack. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So as you can see, here's our SPDIF inputs on our Komplete Audio 6. We have an in and an out, and then on the 11 rack, we have an in and then an out. And this is the kind of cable you are going to need. This is an SPDIF cable. They might be called a digital audio cable, a digital coaxial audio cable, or something like that. But this is what you want. It's a 75 ohm cable. Now, technically, the RCA style cables will work, but they're not 75 ohm, so you might have problems. Now, also technically, if you have like a digital video cable with the RCA style connectors, that is 75 ohm. But you're going to be better off to just get something, like this, that is a, an actual 75 ohm digital audio cable. And of course, it's got two ends on it, obviously. All right. Now, depending on what you're doing, you could possibly get away with just one cable. Since we're using the 11 rack, we're going to need two cables. Otherwise, we can't get a good clock with the 11 rack. So here we have our cables here, and cables here. Now let's see how we hook these up. Now keep in mind, everything you learn in this video is going to be applicable to pretty much any SPDIF gear. That's a good thing about audio. Once you learn it, it's really applicable to everything else, okay? So it's not just the Komplete Audio 6, it's not just the 11 rack. So here we have an in and an out, and an in and an out. Now, how do you think these go together? You think the in goes to the in? Because that's not going to work, is it? I mean, it's like rubbing two holes together, which if you're into it, I'm totally fine with that. But it's not going to work for audio, okay? So what you want to do is just think about your signal routing. Very easy. Just think about it. What we want to do is we want to take the sound out of our 11 rack, the guitar sound more than likely, or if you have an Axe Effects or a Kemper, or whatever you're using as a digital effects unit or another audio interface, you want that sound to come out of your, say, external gear and in to your interface, your Komplete Audio 6. So just think it through. So here's the out. The out will plug in right here on our 11 rack. So that's the out. If you're just going to use one cable, this is how you do it. Out from whatever your hardware is to the ta-da, in of your Komplete Audio 6. Now, if you're going to use one cable, again, you might be able to get by with it like this, going from out to in. We need both cables. So again, we're going in to out or out to in, however you want to think about it. And then we're going to take another cable, another SPDIF cable. We're going to plug that into the in, the 11 rack. And of course, that's going to go to the out of our Komplete Audio 6. So that's how you would hook up your SPDIF gear. It's just think it through, something going out to in, and then something going out to in. So in to out, in to out. Very easy. All right, so now we're back to the front of the units here. Again, we have our in to out and our out to in. Now you need to consider, what do you want your interface to be? Now, it doesn't really make much sense to have our 11 rack as the main interface, at least in this scenario. This is something you're going to have to figure out on your own. I can't really tell you what to do. But in our scenario, we're going to use the Komplete Audio 6 as our main interface. So in that case, where do we want our monitors plugged in? And we would want our monitors plugged into our Komplete Audio 6, okay? So let's go ahead and turn this around. And we want to make sure we have, this is the left one. So we'll go ahead and plug this in, because what's going to happen is we can still use, of course, all of our inputs on our Komplete Audio 6. And we can use the, say, like the guitar input on our 11 rack, and that sound, that signal will be sent out of the 11 rack through those SPDIF cables into here, and then we'll be able to hear this in Pro Tools. You're going to hear the 11 rack, whatever is coming from the 11 rack into our Complete Audio 6, into Pro Tools, and then out of our monitors here. So let's plug in the other monitor, grab that cable, throw it in here. All right, cool. Okay, now here we are on the back of the unit. Again, I just want to mention that we do have this already plugged in to our computer with USB, and in our case, we do have our 11 rack plugged into the computer with USB, just because this, so we can use the 11 rack editor. Okay, so I wanted to mention that as well. Now, why would you want to choose, SPDIF, which is digital, instead of maybe going from the main outs here into, say, our balance ins here? Well, it simply comes down to math, sort of. Digital is going to be a technically cleaner and more accurate signal than analog would be. If we run into here, we're going from analog to digital, and then we're going to run out. So then we got to go back from digital to analog, and then we're going to run back into, say, here. So we're going to have to go from analog to digital again to get that into the computer. And then again, it's going to go from digital to analog so we can hear it out of the monitors. So by keeping it all digital, SPDIF, which is digital, it's going to be, less conversions. Okay, so it'll be digital coming out, digital going in, and of course it's going to have to be, analog to come back out for our actual monitors. But that's why you would want to use SPDIF instead of, say, analog. Now, you can use analog if you think it sounds better. Hey, go for it. You can absolutely use those inputs from the main outs, or, any of these other outputs would technically work, okay? Now, again, our monitors, we plugged in to our Complete Audio 6. This is going to depend greatly on how you want to set up your system. Now, I have this pretty cool headphone amp that I can plug my 11 rack into. So there's the main outs. They run out of here into right here. All right. And there's these really cool throughs. So even if this isn't on, I'm still going to get the signal from the 11 rack through here, and I can plug my monitors in here. But, it really kind of depends on how you have this hooked up. Right now, our monitors are hooked up directly to this. So any signal we get coming out of here is going to run through our 11 rack, out of these cables, out of the out, okay? Out of the out, and then into our Complete Audio 6. And we can also send signal from our Complete Audio 6 through its out, SPDIF, into the 11 rack, which of course will then go back out and then back in. And then we'll hear it through Pro Tools, all right? So I just want to explain that real quick. Just think it through. It's not hard. It's basic signal routing. Just use your brain a little bit and think it through. And back to the front of the units. And by the way, I do have a review video of this Headamp 6 Pro by Art, if you want to check that out. Now, it's an older video, so the quality is not going to be nearly as good as, they have been lately. And I was a lot fatter back then, too. not that matters. But, this is a really cool unit. It's not that expensive either. Definitely check this one out. I really love that through. Like I said, it doesn't even have to be on, and we can get our signal out. But back to our front of our units here. And the next thing we have to decide is, what do we want the clock to? Do we want to clock to this, or do we want to clock to the 11 rack? Now, technically, it shouldn't matter. But in our case, we have to clock to the 11 rack, meaning we have to have the SPDIF sync for our Complete Audio 6. Our clock is going to be the 11 rack. And we're going to show this on the computer because this doesn't have a way to really change this here. Whereas with our 11 rack, we can actually change it here by holding edit back and going to our digital clock input, and we can see external clock is valid. Now, right now we're on internal, which is what we will want to be on. This is specific to this unit. It depends on the unit you're using. Sometimes your external gear might have to be clocked to your interface. And I usually like to use my interface as the main clock, but I've already tested this and I'm not able to use the clock of our Complete Audio 6 and have our 11 rack synced to this. This has to be the clock, the 11 rack has to be the clock, and our Complete Audio 6 will sync to that, which we're going to show on the computer. I just want to be specific to the 11 rack, or again, keep in mind, you're going to have to do some little tweaks based on the hardware you're using. Okay, let me show a little bit of stuff specific to the 11 rack here. So rig input, let me zoom out a little. All right, so rig input, and keep in mind, this is specific to the 11 rack. just read through the manual of whatever sort of hardware processing unit you're using, and just, again, think it through. So in this case, we could plug our guitar directly in to, say, the guitar input, and have our rig input set to guitar, which means that input is going to run through our amp and all of our effects, and we can send that out to our Complete Audio 6, through the SPDIF, and we can use it that way by plugging directly into our effects processor unit. Also, alternatively, because we have an in and an out SPDIF, we could actually plug in our guitar to our Complete Audio 6, have that sent out, and then, again, this is really specific to the 11 rack, but just keep in mind the concepts, okay? Because it's going to apply no matter to what sort of outboard gear you're using. So if we wanted to do it that way, plugged into our Complete Audio 6, okay, our guitar, and send that out SPDIF, we could go to the rig input here and select that to be digital, okay? And as we talked about the line, we could actually have the line be the input to the rig, okay? Or, the mic could be the input to the rig. We could input literally right here and send that out, SPDIF, into this. Now there's, a lot of things. Again, just think it through. It's not that hard if you think it through. So again, if we want to plug directly into the 11 rack, I'll choose guitar. That will go out SPDIF from the 11 rack into the Complete Audio 6, and then into Pro Tools. All right, we're going to look at this a little bit later on. I just want to make sure you're aware of the concept. All right. Now also we have the digital clock input. Right now we're on internal, which again we will have to be in this case, but we may need to switch this to external for some other if you have some other sort of unit. It just sort of depends. And then we have the digital output. Again, this is going to depend greatly on what you're using. We're using the 11 rack, so we could have split in, split out, which basically means one side is wet, one side is dry. So one side would be running through all of this, the amp and all of the effects, and the other side would be just the complete dry guitar, or whatever the signal actually is. Okay, we have all of these things. The output of the DAW, mirror the analog, so mirror basically the main outs. Basically, the rig outputs. Rig output would be whatever is coming through the rig. Okay, so whatever going through the amp and all of the effects, which this is probably the one you'll use, the rig outputs and the split in and out. Again, specifically the 11 rack, those are the two you'll probably be using if you want just the rig outputs, and sometimes you may want the split in, split out, because that means you could record your dry and wet at the same exact time through, SPDIF. All right, so we've spent enough time here. Let's go ahead and sync these up. So we're gonna have to move over to the computer for that. Okay, so now here we are at the computer. Let's sync up our two interfaces. In order to do that, we'll need to open the control panels, and we'll go to all apps here. We'll go down to Native Instruments, and we want our Complete Audio 6 control panel. Okay, let's go ahead and open up our control panel for our 11 rack. And again, this is going to depend on your hardware. Okay, but we're using an 11 rack, so we'll want this open. So what we want to do is, since we can't have, two internal clocks, because that can cause problems with our audio, we want these to be synced together. Now, maybe you have like a really expensive clock that you're going to clock all your stuff to. That's fine, but we're not going to get into that here. What we're going to do is we're going to use our interfaces. Now, one of them has to be the master. Now, as I mentioned, I personally would like to have my Complete Audio 6 be the clock source, and we'll just clock the 11 rack to that. But that actually doesn't work. Okay, now it may work for you on your hardware, but it doesn't work here. In order to do that, what you would do is you would set your 11 rack to SPDIF, okay, and then you would leave your Complete Audio 6 set to internal. It's really just that simple. Okay, and we're not getting any errors up here or anything, so that means we have a good clock. And if we actually look at the 11 rack, which I'll just do real quick here, edit back and go to our clock input, and you can see now clock source is external. Okay, so this is actually good, but like I said, it's not going to work for what we want. In this case, again, keep in mind your hardware may be different. Just understand the concept. Okay, back at the computer, and since I already know that in our case, the 11 rack has to be set to internal. Let's go ahead and switch this to internal, and we're going to switch our Complete Audio 6 to be external, so it will be synced. The clock source will be the 11 rack. So it's really just as simple as switching it over. So watch this. Pow. And did you see those lights? Now we have SPDIF sync. Pretty cool. And again, that's all there is to it. Now you have to have one be the main and one be the slave to it. You can't have them both set to an internal and expect to get good audio. I mean, you're going to get all kind of problems. If I had both of these set to internal and I somehow tried to record with them, it's not going to work. At least not on Windows. Now, if you're doing aggregate on Mac, I'm a Windows person. I can't tell you that, but we want external, and we'll go back to the 11 rack so I can show you this is synced up perfectly. All right, so we're back at the 11 rack. Let's go ahead and go to our digital clock. And now we can see that our external clock is valid. Clock source is internal. Okay, because again, we switched this to internal, so the 11 rack is the clock source, and we're synced right there. Okay, so our Complete Audio 6 is using the clock of the 11 rack. All right, so back at the computer, once again, the 11 rack clock source is internal. Complete Audio 6 clock source is external SPDIF. All right, and we can see the light right there. Now we're ready to actually launch our DAW. In this case, we're going to do Pro Tools. And I already have a recent project here. We'll just open this one, Test 11. Now, if you have a problem opening Pro Tools, you may want to set both of your interfaces to internal, launch Pro Tools, and then go ahead and sync these up. Sync this to your 11 rack, or if you have to sync it the other way, then you can do it after Pro Tools is launched, if you have a problem. All right, so here we are in Pro Tools. I can remove that plugin. And what we need to do is make sure our playback engine is Complete Audio 6, which it is. If it's not, you can just set that right here. Okay, so our playback engine is the Complete Audio 6. Our 11 rack is running into our Complete Audio 6 via SPDIF. All right, so it's like an outboard processor. So how can we use this? Well, first you want to make sure your I/O is set up correctly, which ours should be. If it's not, just default everything in here and you're cool. Okay, now specifically to the 11 rack, if we're going to be using the SPDIF inputs, we want our embedded rigs. Make sure you come down here in your I/O and you switch this to the SPDIF inputs, so that way you get your embedded rig still, okay? Most of the time it's probably going to be on your 11 rack guitar input or whatever. But since, as I mentioned at the top, even though we're using two interfaces, if you look here in Pro Tools, we're just saying the input 1, input 2L. Now, this really should say input 1L, input 2R, but as I mentioned in our unbox video, we can come in here, we can change this. I just haven't done it yet. I can simply come in here and rename this. But don't get confused by this here, okay? So input 1, that's the left channel. Input 1, 2.R, that's the second channel here. So since we're not seeing our 11 rack inputs, our guitar in, our mic in, things like that, don't think you're going to be able to use two interfaces this way and use all of the inputs. We're not. All we're going to be able to use is the SPDIF inputs of our Complete Audio 6 and the output of our 11 rack into this. Okay, so you're not going to see those inputs show up. What you would choose is SPDIF. Now this is a mono channel, so of course we'll choose either the left, so that's the .L, .R. Here again, I don't like how this defaults, but this is just how it does. So since SPDIF, it's like a stereo, it's like a dual channel thing. We have a left and right signal, as I mentioned, like on that split in, split out, which is pretty cool. So if you want input, boom, you just choose that. Again, our input is the left channel of SPDIF because this is a mono channel. The output is our 1 and 2, and the output is our monitors, which are plugged in to our Complete Audio 6. Okay, so now if I plug a guitar into the 11 rack, other end into the guitar, of course. Now, if I arm this channel or just monitor it and turn up the guitar, and I'm not hearing anything. Let's turn up the volume. Okay, so now we can actually hear. That's coming out of the 11 rack. Now, let me pull up the 11 rack editor here. So what we are hearing is the guitar, which is plugged into the 11 rack, and that sound is running through our 11 rack rig, okay, into our Komplete Audio 6 via SPDIF, and then into Pro Tools. Again, our input was SPDIF, not guitar in, not, you know, whatever your interface would have said if it was the main interface. It's going to be SPDIF. All right, keep that in mind. And the output is the output of our Komplete Audio 6, R1 and 2. All right, so again, if I play, again, I'm plugged into the 11 rack. Now we're getting the input of the 11 rack into our Komplete Audio 6. Hopefully that makes sense, okay? Now, this here is a stereo channel. I could do the same thing here. So it's left and right. So if I just monitor that, turn up my guitar, of course. Hear that? I'm not sure if you can hear that, but one side is wet and one side is dry. So let's go back to the 11 rack and look at this real quick. All right, so here we are back at the 11 rack again. Guitar is going into here and SPDIF is going into there. All right, so if we hold edit back here, again, this depends on your hardware. Go to the digital output, select. You see we currently have split in, split out. Now for the rest of this video, I'm going to do this from the control panel for the 11 rack, or from the 11 rack editor, just so we don't have to keep switching back and forth. Just keep in mind, you can do it from your hardware. And again, it depends on the hardware you're using. If your hardware only is accessible from its front panel, then this is the way you'll do it. Okay, like this here. If you have a control app, like we happen to for the 11 rack, then you can do it from either place, okay? So we had split in, split out. So that means one side was dry, one side was wet. And actually, that's reversed. One side was wet, one side was dry. So just keep that in mind. You really have to decide. So if we go to the rig input, which is guitar running in, right? And then out is split in, split out. So wet and dry is going out in this case. If we switch this to rig outputs, then both sides are going to be wet. So let's go back to the computer, and we're going to stay at the computer, I think, and we'll just use the 11 rack control panel here from here on out. Just keep in mind, if your hardware is only accessible from a front panel, that's absolutely fine. Even with the 11 rack, you can do it this way. All right, so let's go back to the computer. Okay, so we're back at the computer. Remember, we switched what we were doing here. Go to user options, and you can see now our outputs for digital are rig outputs. All right, so now listen to the difference here. We already have that track monitored. So now both sides are wet or affected. If we switch that over to how we had it, split in, split out, this is a great way to record, again, specific to the 11 rack, this is a great way to record your wet and dry sound at the same time. So let's demo what exactly that would mean. And for that, I think it's going to be best that we use mono tracks. So these are two mono tracks right here. What we'll do, we'll go to interface and we'll make sure the input is, one of them will be the left side of SPDIF, the other one will be the right side of SPDIF. Once again, we have this set to split in, split out. Okay? Very easy. Go and hide that. We'll monitor both these tracks real quick. Hopefully you can hear that. Let's go ahead and I'll just record a little section here. All right, so I'll just hit record and we're off. Now what I should have done, just stop that. Let's redo this the right way. What you would probably want to do, because while you're playing, you're not going to want to be hearing that dry sound. I should mute that dry track, which is our right side, okay, of the SPDIF. Again, in our case, consult your manual for whatever hardware you're using. So I'll just mute that and we'll play this again. So that way we're not going to be distracted by that dry sound. All right, so record again. All right, pretty cool. Now, look here in Pro Tools. I'll unmute both of them. I'll just hit play. All right, so now I'll mute the dry track. All right, and now I'll mute the wet track, and this here's the dry track. And we'll hear this. All right, that's pretty cool, because that means if we want to play, say we're playing along with a band, say we're laying down our guitar tracks over drums or whatever, and maybe we won't be happy with this sound that we have right here, this wet sound right here. We can always reamp this sound now using this dry track, because it's the exact same guitar track. We could actually send this dry track out, and this holds true for anything, by the way. Anything you have, if you have vocals, a dry vocal track that you recorded through a mic input, even the mic input of the Komplete Audio 6, you could send that out into your effect processing unit. Furthermore, we could, say, use a plugin on this. So this is a Native Instruments interface. So let's use Guitar Rig 5, I guess. Throw this up here, and we'll grab styles, go to metal, and we'll go to, say, slip note wide. All right, just hit play. Now it doesn't sound too good there, because we're hearing both of these wet tracks now, and they're both going down the middle. So let's pan one right, one left, turn it down a little bit. So that's pretty cool. All right, so that is something you could do as well, is use that plugin on that dry track. Now, as I mentioned, because we're using the 11 rack, let me go ahead and get rid of this plugin here. Now, because we're using the 11 rack, we can actually send this dry track out using a process known as reamping. Now, again, this is going to depend greatly on your hardware, but even if we had, say, recorded a microphone, say, through this input on our Komplete Audio 6, we could send that signal out either live or after the fact through whatever processing unit we're using. In our case, again, an 11 rack, but depending on what you're using, maybe you're using a reverb unit, some sort of vocal unit, you could send that out, whether it's recorded, directly from that interface. Like, we could have a mic input here on the 11 rack, record that through SPDIF, and we could record that sound through the signal chain, and we could use split in, split out, and get, the dirty track, as it's called, and the dry track, and then we could always reamp that, or just put plugins on it, as we did here. So just keep all this stuff in mind. I know it's a lot of information, but just sort of think it through. All right, so let's look at the process of sending a track out that we have recorded here, and I re-recorded this guitar track, by the way. Okay, so that's our dry track. We can send that out, through this unit, through our SPDIF cable, into our 11 rack in our case, and that will come back out and into our Komplete Audio 6 and back into Pro Tools. So how do you set that up? This is something you'll be doing a lot, especially if your outboard unit is, like I said, like a vocal processor of some kind. All right, so we have our track. We'll come to our output, okay? And we'll go to the output, and right now this track is going through our monitors, okay? And by the way, all this audio you're hearing is coming right from our monitors, recorded through this video camera right here. Okay, so it's not going direct, so don't worry about the sound quality. We're not going direct, it's just coming out of our monitors. All right, so we're going to switch the output of the track to SPDIF. Now what that means is this track now is going to be sent out of this unit via SPDIF into our 11 rack. So now we have to set some things up, because if I just hit play now and I have everything else muted, if I just hit play, we're getting our level, but we don't hear anything. All right, so let's set this up. Again, we could do this from the front panel, but let's just do it right from here. So we'll go to our rig input, and this is how you would reamp, by the way, for guitar, or even for vocals, really anything. And our rig input is now going to be digital. It could be L or R or L and R. Not really that important for what we're doing here. We'll just do L and R. Okay, we'll go to user options. So our digital outputs, what do we want that to be? It's been split in, split out. Let's change it to rig outputs. So that way it's just the rig output on both sides, split in, split out. One side is wet, one side is dry, as we just saw right up here. So we'll just do rig outputs. Okay, so now we're all set up. Again, you could do this right from the front panel of the 11 rack, or your whatever hardware unit you're using. more than likely. So again, input is digital, left, right. The track output is SPDIF, which is, of course, our digital. Now, if we hit play, again, we're not hearing anything. And why is that? Well, because we're sending this track out of SPDIF, we need to, well, I mean, let's just draw it out in our head. It's being sent out digitally via SPDIF through the cable, through the out cable, into the 11 rack. It's coming back out of the 11 rack and back into our interface because we have our rig output. You know, it's running through our rig output, and the output of our digital is the rig output. So it's going to come back in. Now it's coming back in, but we're just playing this one track. So we need another track to monitor what is coming in, right? So just keep that in mind. So what we need to do is create another track. Now we already have one here. And since we're dealing with SPDIF, we could do a stereo track, even though we're sending mono out, you know, the output of the 11 rack, and because it's SPDIF, we have two channels to deal with. So we could do either mono, this here's a mono track, or we could do stereo. It doesn't matter. It depends on what you want, okay? So we'll use stereo for now. And we'll go to the input, and we want the input to be SPDIF because, you know, it's going through our 11 rack and back in. So now if we monitor this track, audio 3, and the input is SPDIF, the output of our dry track is SPDIF, and the input to our 11 rack is SPDIF. Now we're actually going to hear this. Pretty cool, right? And of course we can record that, but first let me show you on a mono track. So we can do either left or right. You know, it's not important in this case since we're having the rig output instead of split in out. But if I just monitor this and hit play, okay, pretty cool stuff, right? So keep that in mind. That's something you'll definitely need to know. Now, of course, we can record it. If I hit record here, there we go. So now we have reamped that track, or if it was a mic track, you know, and you run your vocal through a reverb unit or whatever, that's how you could do that as well. And, you know, we wouldn't need split in, split out in this case because we already have a dry track. So there's no reason to, you know, have another dry track. So that is, you know, something to consider as well there, is how to send this out via SPDIF and then create another track and make sure the input is SPDIF. And then you can record that. All right, pretty cool stuff. Now let's look at another concept. So we've already used the guitar input on our processing unit, which is an 11 rack. Keep in mind, depends on your hardware. We could have used, by the way, we could have used the mic input on the 11 rack, and we could have done the same exact thing we did with the guitar, so keep that in mind. But let's look at another concept of using an input on our Complete Audio 6 and sending that out via SPDIF live instead of you know, reamping it later on. We can do this as well. And again, we're going to use a guitar, but you could put a mic in here as well. All right, so it could be a mic or, you know, whatever input you want there, or it could even be something on the back if you want to do it that way. Okay, so now we have our guitar plugged into 1 and 2 here, and we have our monitor on here. If I turn that up, and I don't even have my pick in my hand here. So we're hearing the dry guitar. Okay. Nothing here in Pro Tools is active right now. So let me actually just get rid of this track here. We'll just use this mono track. And right now the input is on SPDIF. We want this on our left channel, input 1L. So it's actually right here. So we'll input monitor this. All right, so now we really don't need this monitor here. So we can switch, as we showed in the last video there. You can turn it off. So now if I just play, there we go. So now we could, of course, play guitar dry. We could put a plugin on it if we wanted to, or we could send it through our digital effects unit, whatever our SPDIF outboard gear is. Now, how do we do that? Again, very simple. Just think this stuff through. It's all very easy. It's just a matter of routing. So our input is from our physical interface, our Complete Audio 6, our input number 1, which is the left channel. Now, in order to send this signal, which is, you know, in our case is a guitar, but it could very well be a mic. In order to get that to our SPDIF unit, we need to send it out of Pro Tools, you know, and through our interface and out of an SPDIF cable into our actual effects unit. So go to your output and choose, very easy, very logical if you just think about it, and choose SPDIF. There we go. Now if I turn up my guitar and play, you can see we're getting input, but we're not hearing anything. Now I could monitor this if I wanted, but I don't want to. So again, this is very similar to what we just did when we were sending this dry signal out, and we had to make sure we sent it out SPDIF, and we needed to have another track so we could actually hear what's going on. Same exact thing here. Since we're sending this signal, this dry signal out to our effects unit, we need another track to actually hear what's going on, what's going through our 11 rack and coming back into Pro Tools. So again, could be a mono track, could be a stereo track. Doesn't matter. Really depends on what you want. Now it does matter if you want a stereo track and you choose mono. Obviously that matters. But what I'm saying is you don't have to use one or the other. We'll use a stereo track. So on our input to this stereo track, what do we want? SPDIF, of course. So now if I monitor this track, audio 3, remember our input right here is actually in this interface. So now watch when I play. Pretty cool, right? So what's happening is the sound from our guitar is traveling through this cable into our Complete Audio 6 into this channel here, as you can see, and it's traveling through SPDIF into our 11 rack and back out via SPDIF, because we have SPDIF sectioned here, chosen here for our input. It's coming back in, and then we can actually hear the 11 rack. So just get all that situated in your mind. It's it's not that hard. It's running through here because our input is digital left and right. If this input was a guitar and then I were to play, now we're not, well, actually that's not right. I need to play because I forgot we didn't have a track there. But if I play now, we're not hearing anything because we're not sending that signal through the 11 rack via the rig input. This is just how the 11 rack works. So again, depending on your hardware might have a certain input that it needs to be chosen. So don't freak out if you don't hear anything. Just look at your inputs for your actual hardware. So now if I play, very cool. One thing I should mention is we don't really have a volume control for our SPDIF. So that will be controlled either on your hardware somewhere within the software. So in our case, it would be this volume right here. If we just do the mains, I could turn that all the way down and it's still gonna make sound. So we control that right here in our case. So I'll pull it way down, and then pretty cool. So you can see we're getting input here, which is just the dry track, and that's being sent out through our 11 rack. And again, this could have been a microphone into a reverb unit, some sort of vocal effects unit, whatever the case may be. So just understand that concept as well. The concept of sending out a signal via SPDIF and having another track to receive that signal so you can actually hear what's happening on your processing unit. And of course we can record this. I could record this. I could record both at the same time. This would be another way you could record dry and dirty at the same time, by recording your actual guitar or microphone or whatever, and recording whatever's coming out of your effect unit. So let me just record here real quick. Let me make sure this is on mute, okay? Probably want to turn off that monitor. There we go. So now, as you can see, this is our dirty track and this is that dry track. I should probably actually have turned that up before we recorded, but you can see the point there. I hit play. Cool. And then of course we had the dry track, which we're not going to hear because remember we're sending it out SPDIF. So if you want to hear that track, you want to put a plugin on this dry track, make sure you come down to your output and switch this back to our speakers. So it's actually going to come out of our monitors here. All right, pretty cool. All right, so I believe that really wraps up this video. I believe that pretty much everything you need to know about using SPDIF. Just remember those main concepts of using 2 SPDIF cables. That way we can get a good clock. In our case, again, we had to sync our actual interface, our Complete Audio 6, to our 11 rack. As you can see, 11 rack is internal. This one here, our Complete Audio 6, is external. You're never going to want them both to be internal. Okay, that's never going to happen. At least, if you're using SPDIF and you're syncing them up. Again, Mac is a different story if you're using aggregate. One of them needs to be SPDIF, one of them needs to be internal. Okay, in our case, we have to have the 11 rack as internal. Okay, and then whenever we switch this to external, because we have this one on an internal, you'll see down here, synchronization is established. Okay, two devices established. Okay, so make sure that's synced up. All right, make sure your monitors are plugged into the interface that you're using as your main interface. So Playback Engine, Complete Audio 6, and as you saw, our monitors are plugged into our actual Complete Audio 6. Make sure you understand the concept of course, our I/O. You may have to default that. Okay, make sure you understand the concept of signal routing. As I mentioned, we don't see the inputs for the 11 rack. Like if my 11 rack was my main interface, I would see guitar in, mic in, line left, line right, so on and so forth. We don't see that because we're using it as an external effects unit. And that's how it's going to be for if you have a vocal effects unit, an axe effects, whatever the case may be. So keep that in mind. Your signal routing, your input will be SPDIF. Okay? That is if you're running through, if you're actually, say your guitar is actually plugged in to, in our case, our 11 rack. So our input would be SPDIF. Keep in mind any signal routing you'll need to do in your actual interface, whatever it is. Our input would need to be guitar if we were plugged directly into that interface, because the 11 rack has its own internal routing that's different from the routing within Pro Tools. Okay, so there's two kind of routings we have to deal with here. And that may be the same for whatever piece of hardware you have. So keep in mind the internal routing of your unit, what signal you're sending where. Again, if we were plugged directly into the 11 rack, we would want the input for the rig to be guitar. If we were plugged into our Complete Audio 6, and we're going to play guitar through this, which actually doesn't make that much sense, but I mean, you can do it. Our rig input would be digital left, right. If we wanted to record a dry track or send the dry track out into our effects unit, again, the input would be digital left, right, and our output, we would make sure we're sending a track out SPDIF, and then we would have another track that is set to SPDIF for the input, and we would monitor that track. That way we could actually hear the input to whatever our SPDIF effects unit happens to be. Okay, so just remember all that stuff, all your routing, syncing up your clocks, all of that stuff. It's not that hard. Just think about it logically, and all of this stuff really makes a lot of sense when you think about it. And also keep in mind you'll need to adjust the volume within your effects unit. Okay, because we don't have separate gain or input knobs on our Complete Audio 6. All of that volume will take place in your DAW or within a certain area of your effects unit. Okay, so keep all that stuff in mind. It's really not that hard. Just figure it out in your head. Once you have it established in your head, you'll be way ahead of so many people if you just think it through logically, internalize it, and you're going to use these concepts for years and years to come. Okay guys, so that is how to use the SPDIF input and output on your Native Instruments Complete Audio 6.